Reply of the Honorable Minister will be tomorrow. Shri Suresh Prabhu, he was on his legs.
से बैठे हम 0 आवर के लिए
After this,
नहीं सर 6 बजे का कहा था स्पीकर साहब ने 6 बजे कहा था स्पीकर साहब ने सर
no.
सर टुडे
We are continuing the decision.
सर
We are continuing the decision on the demands for grants, supplementary and general budget.
सर सर पहले बता देते हम चले जाते हैं सुबह से बैठे हैं 0
If you want, then after this decision you can raise.
Sir, this supplementary demand of grants, as I was saying, should also be considered along with the statement that the Finance Minister has made to the Parliament on the implementation of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Because under the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the government is obliged to reduce the revenue deficit to 0 in a stipulated period of time. So when we are considering the supplementary demands of grant, when additional expenditure is going to be voted, I would like to know how is it going to affect the revenue deficit of the government, which is supposed to control under the act which is passed by this very parliament. In fact, the first thing he did when he was presenting the maiden budget of this government, he notified the implementation of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So I would like to know the impact that it will have on these demands for grants will have on the overall fiscal deficit as well as the revenue deficit. Sir, the quality of expenditure is extremely important. Normally, in this parliament we are saying that we keep voting in that additional expenditure.
Because this will go
It is always incremental expenditure which is always voted in along with the total expenditure for which the sanction was already taken. In this case, the sanction has been given by the last session of the parliament. So what is important is, I would request the finance minister, the government, to come out before the parliament and tell whether there is a possibility of saving any expenditure for which the schemes are on for several years together. The previous government has started, the government before that has started, the schemes are going on, and every time there is a temptation for the government to start a new scheme. So the old scheme continues, the new scheme also continues, and the expenditure keeps growing. So whether there is a possibility of the government making a statement about a quality of expenditure that is incurred by the government, and that would really help us to find out, when the finance minister had made a very interesting statement that he is interested in outcome rather than outlays. If the outlays, that is what we are going to vote in, who is going to estimate the outcome of that? And therefore, probably you should also come out with a white paper, which you had come once upon a time on the subsidy. I think there is a need for a white paper about how the outcome and the outlay is going to really work. Probably you can take the parliament into confidence and we'll really know as to how it is really going to perform. Sir, our growth rate last quarter was about 8%. We are happy that now Indian economy has entered a new trajectory of growth. We are probably growing at 8% and we should really target to grow at 10%. What is not going to allow us to go from 8% to 10% is our poor state of infrastructure. You take any infrastructure and we are really not performing as well as we should be. In fact, people come to India despite infrastructure, but just imagine that if you have infrastructure in place, how much more growth we could have. And in infrastructure, in my opinion, there are few areas in which the government should really focus on. One is a policy. I think in some areas, even there are grey areas about policy. Policy is not very clear, not stable also, because the new government, when it came in, it said that they want to review the Electricity Act. As a result of that, there were so many investors who otherwise would have invested, were taken off the guard and they were thinking whether they should really make the investment or not. So policy is an extremely important thing. So second point is regulation. The Prime Minister, in fact, in one of his first public statements as the Prime Minister of India, had said that infrastructure is very critical and in that the regulation is very critical. And therefore he had said he is nominating the Planning Commission to do the job. I really don't know what has happened after that. The Planning Commission, what type of a work they have done, what type of new statement they have made. So I think this is about the time that a Finance Minister, I'm sure, would like to enlighten us about how progress has been made on this regulation in infrastructure, which has been correctly identified as a weak area in implementation of this. So third area would be the implementation of projects. Sir, we have seen that all the projects that are implemented, there is a huge cost and time overrun. There is a standing committee to fix responsibility under the chairmanship of the cabinet secretary. So far, we have never been able to fix any responsibility for deciding as to why the overruns are taking place. Either we should abolish this committee or we should come out with a new structure wherein implementation of infrastructure project should take place in a stipulated time frame without any cost overrun. And I think that again is a very weak area, and I am mentioning this because this will all have impact on our state public financing. Sir, financing of infrastructure is another very interesting area. The Deputy Chairman Planning Commission had come out with a note saying that the forex reserves of India, part of the reserves should be utilized by creating a special purpose vehicle to finance it. I would like to know from the Finance Minister what is the implementation of this idea, because that idea itself was opposed by some of the economists on theory. But probably I would rather support such an idea to find out whether infrastructure can be financed to an idea like this. And I would want to know from the Finance Minister whether any new developments have taken place on that count. So other area, which again is very critical to infrastructure project implementation, is private-public partnership. There is no policy in place for private-public partnership in sub-sectors, whether you take power, you take ports, you take airports, you take telecommunication. So how this is going to work, how the model is going to work, probably this again we'll really like to know. And sir, one final point on infrastructure is about the quality of infrastructure itself. So it is not enough now that we can only assure supply of a service. What is very critical is the quality of that service. Because electricity comes to people's houses, but the quality of electricity is more important than just getting electricity. So therefore, quality of service is as important as in my opinion. Sir, one of the other point that our Prime Minister had said in one of his first days as the Prime Minister is that reforming bureaucracy is extremely important, because any expenditure that now we are going to vote in is finally going to be spent and idea is going to be implemented to the same bureaucracy which we wanted to reform. Sir, what are the changes that are really taken place on that count is something I would really like to know from our Honorable Finance Minister. Sir, some of the schemes that are mentioned in this, one of them is a very laudable scheme called Rural Employment Guarantee Program. We are now voting in 300 crores for that. 300 crores for how many districts? I think this is not really mentioned. So how many districts are going to have this scheme? How many mandates are going to be spent on that? While passing this law, some of us had raised some apprehensions while supporting the bill that the final expenditure that is going to be incurred on this program should result into creation of some concrete tangible assets. And then Minister had assured us that he will take all the steps before implementing this idea, because we had said that in the days of our former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, that 22 paise is only finally spent out of 1 rupee that is sent from here. Now I don't know how many paise could already be spent. So if you are going in 300 crores, unless we take those precautionary measures, unless we take all those steps that are required to be taken before amount is spent, probably the outcome that the Finance Minister wants against the outlay of 300 crores will not come. And therefore, I would like to know how this particular scheme of 300 crores, what is going to be spent under this, is now put in place. So other bill that we had passed in this Parliament was the Right of Information Bill, law. Right to information, I'm sorry. Right to information. Sir, I was just curiously looking at the supplementary demands of grant under the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. There is no extra provision made. I'm happy about it. If you can implement the idea without incurring any additional expenditure, that's a very good thing. But when we are passing that bill, we had already stipulated a financial implication of that and said that so much amount of money will be required. I would like to know from the Minister whether he is fully confident of implementing that law without incurring any additional expenditure. I would really like to know. Sir, the similar scheme was, which he had also promised, was for water. He had said about more than 1 million water bodies would be revitalized. There are small little bodies which we really need to revitalize, because there will be the storages which can use, that water can be used from that for irrigation, for drinking water and for other variety of purposes. I would like to know how many of these millions of wells which were going to be revitalized have already been revitalized, and how much is the amount which has been spent on that, because that will also help us to decide the quality of expenditure that we really need to incur. Sir, one point, and that's an important one, is that the central government has now a limited role to play in bringing about reforms in the entire country like India. There are so many states which are refusing to move ahead as is required. So unless they also go hand in hand with the program of the central government, the real results of change will not be seen by the common man, by the poor people who are really suffering because of lack of such new exercise. I would like to know what are the steps the government is contemplating to make sure that all the states move in the manner in which the central government is thinking, because there is a National Development Council which approves the 5-year plan. After approving the 5-year plan, then there is a standing committee of chief ministers which actually go through the implementation of it. So therefore the states are on board while the 5-year plan is already approved. So unless we actually take them on board, it will really not happen, and therefore I would really be interested to know from them. Sir, in India, the people who are living below poverty line is maybe something like 23%, because that definition is on the basis of those who earn less than $1 a day. But those who earn less than $2 a day, probably the number of people below that level could be as high as 50%. So therefore there is a large number of people who really need to be uplifted from this poverty, and for this the structural changes are required, and unless we address that, we tinkering with changes here and there is not going to help. And therefore, while I am supporting the supplementary demand for grant, I would like to be assured that government is also thinking of making sure that the expenditure spent is already on the basis of what the finance minister has been rightly saying, the output and the outcomes are properly taken into consideration. So I would request the finance minister to probably enlighten us on all these points. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.